In case you haven't noticed by that alert, we are going to be recording today's presentation, so we'll be able to send that out to everyone who attended, and we'll be able to put that up for people to be able to go back to reference. Let's see. All right, while people are matriculating in from the waiting room, we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. Again, welcome everybody joining us for today's Coffee with the Authors. We're really excited about this one. Brief housekeeping, first and foremost, I do want to ask everyone, if you're not actively asking a question, please have yourself muted. We are going to have an interactive presentation today. So if you do have questions, please post them in the chat, or you can also use the handy raise hands feature. I will show what that looks like. So if you want to raise your hand, you do this, and we can see this handy little hand show up here. And then we know you have a question, so we'll make sure that we can get to you. And if you do have a question you want to ask during the presentation, you certainly are welcome to put your hand up or ask it in the chat. But we're going to do a brief presentation, and then we're going to open up for a full discussion, a full interactive roundtable kind of discussion. In terms of questions, please try and keep any questions relevant to the topic. If you do have more personal questions regarding your treatment, we are going to be available. We're going to post contact info, but we want to keep the general conversation and questions relevant to the main topic, so everyone can enjoy the discussion. So without further ado, I will start introductions. First of all, I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Will Grove with the Brain Injury Alliance of Arizona. Many of you I recognize and have spoken to, and I'm very excited to see. Today's presentation is going to be given by Dr. Marilyn Sanders. She's the author of Polyvagal Theory and the Developing Child, Systems of Care for Strengthening Kids, Families, and Communities. Dr. Sanders is a board-certified pediatrician and neonatologist caring for critically ill infants and their families, and a professor of pediatrics at the UConn School of Medicine. She also provides neurodevelopmental follow-up for babies and infants. Her scholarly interests are in providing trauma-informed care to hospitalized newborns, infants, young children, and their families. Her focus is the impact of the autonomic nervous system's sense of safety, danger, or life threat on our emotions and behavior. She lectures throughout the United States and Europe. And I'm just remembering, if you want to use closed captions, please hit the button at the bottom. I forgot to mention that during housekeeping. But without further ado, I will, Dr. Sanders, I'll toss this over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much, Will. I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here, just to let you know, because I can't see any of you. All I can see are my slides. So if you notice anything odd about my face, it's because I am speaking to a slide set. So that said, I am certainly happy to take questions if things are not easily understood during my brief presentation, or when I'm done with my presentation. Obviously, I will come off screen share and I'll have the opportunity to actually see you face to face. I am a pediatrician neonatologist. I need to be clear about what I do and what I don't do. My life for the last 35 years has actually been spent taking care of critically ill newborns and young infants. And my familiarity with brain injury is actually brain injury that happens in or around the time of birth or in the first few weeks after birth. So from a standpoint of my clinical experience, that is where it lies. But I think that a lot of the concepts that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes are things that are going to be widely applicable and understandable across the range of brain injury. Whenever I give a talk, I like to think about what is the message that I really want you to walk away with. And if I were to summarize that for this talk, it would really be moving from a viewpoint of what's wrong with you to what happened to you is key to supporting persons in recovery from brain injury and their families. So as we think about this, we really have to go back to the evolutionary biology of the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system is basically the unconscious nervous system, the automatic nervous system that is buried deep in your brain that keeps you breathing, your heart beating, and is responsible for what kinds of feelings and emotions that you have. So as we look at it across the history, the evolutionary history, going back millions of years, of vertebrates, in other words, organisms with a spine, we see that the earliest vertebrates, the lizards, the reptiles that you see on the left, when they were frightened, when they were afraid, really had only one response available to them, and that was to immobilize. So if you think about what you know, for example, about reptiles, they will stop in their tracks, they will blend in with the environment, and they will try and be as small as they can possibly be so whatever predator happens to be in the midst leaves. As we proceeded along the evolutionary ladder, up, for example, toward fish, the capacity to either stay and fight or flee came on board. And that's supported by the sympathetic nervous system that we all know about, epinephrine, cortisol. But it's only in mammals that the capacity to find safety in the presence of other persons is there. And that capacity to find safety in the presence of other persons is governed by something called the ventral vagal nerve. And if you are familiar with the autonomic nervous system, if you are familiar with things like vagal stimulation, you know that there are many strategies that are involved for people to try and enhance that kind of tone so that they can feel safe and secure in the presence of others. So as we talked about, the vagus nerve starts in way back here at the kind of back of the brain, and the vagus nerve is your body's master control switch. So it controls things that happen both above the diaphragm, for example, how fast or slow your heart beats, how your airways in your lungs work, and also below the diaphragm, for example, like your digestion. So we often call the vagus nerve above the diaphragm the safe or social vagus, and the vagus nerve below the diaphragm, the rest and digest vagus. Both of them are important. You can't live without either of them, and you also can't live without a sympathetic nervous system as well, because that's what helps you rise to the occasion when there is significant stress in your life. When you are in a position in which you feel safe and secure, you can engage in something called social connectedness. So we all hear a lot about social engagement. We all hear a lot about the importance of being with other people, not being isolated. But when we talk about social connectedness in this context, we're going to talk about it in a way that's a little bit different than other people use it. And this is the definition that my mentor, Dr. Stephen Porges, who developed the polyvagal theory, polyvagal because there's more than one vagus nerve that we rely upon, is the ability to mutually, meaning synchronously, in other words, at the same time, and reciprocally, in a back and forth fashion, regulate both physiological and behavioral state. And that's really important to keep in mind, because we're not just talking about how your behavior appears. We're also talking about what's going on at this very basic level between the biology of two people who are engaged in an interaction. So the limbic system is way deep in the brain, as you can see in this slide. And the limbic system controls the way we feel at the deepest unconscious level. It controls whether we feel safe and social, whether we feel like we are in danger, or whether we feel like we are actually in a life-threatening type of situation. And the amygdala, which you can see here sort of at the bottom of the slide, is what we would call the alarm system of the limbic system. The amygdala, if it senses danger, will send a message out, beware, there's danger in your midst. Messages from the hippocampus also down there near the bottom, which essentially is the site of memory inside the limbic system, could either facilitate this and enhance this, or perhaps even modulate that alarm. And in a situation in which you may be feeling in danger, but not totally out of control, that message will go to what's called the prefrontal cortex, which is at the very front of the brain. This is not the thinking part of the brain, but it's the planning and organization part of the brain to modulate the alarm. Now, if you can't modulate that alarm, if you can't modulate that stress, then that message from the amygdala to the hippocampus keeps going and going and going, and generates a situation in which people typically feel very sympathetically activated and often out of control. So we know that we are constantly scanning our environment for safety or danger, even as you're listening to me talk today. Your unconscious nervous system, your automatic nervous system, it essentially has tentacles out as to whether what I'm saying, and if you can see me, what you're seeing on my face is safe or brings some element of danger. And that's a combination of things that are happening in the external environment. So are you hearing noises that are frightening? Is there light, for example, that is piercing and bothering you? Do you have some other kind of sensation? And also the relational environment. And the relational environment basically is who's there with you, and how are the two of you potentially sending signals back and forth. And together, those form what we call an internal sensory experience. So what I see, what I hear, what I expect, my nervous system expects, based upon prior experience, will create some kind of feeling inside me that we call a neuroception. And that neuroception, once again, not something that is aware to you in your conscious brain, but you will either feel that sense of safety, that sense of danger, or that sense of life threat. And we have a lot of different terms for that, idioms for that. We'll say things like, I feel it in my gut, or I feel it in my bones. And those are descriptors of neuroceptions. And what I want you to take note of is how quickly we can go back and forth between safety, danger, and even life threat, depending upon what is happening in our immediate environment. So neuroception basically is the unconscious awareness of safety, danger, or life threat. Whoops. Now, when we feel safe and secure, we can use the social engagement system. So when you look at this picture, for example, of this mother and her baby, I don't need to tell you anything about them for you to know that something good is going on. You notice their facial expressions. If we could hear them, we would see it in their vocalizations. When you feel safe and social, you can listen, you can hear. And feeling safe and social fosters calm, both by inhibiting sympathetic influences, so it tamps down things like cortisol and epinephrine. It blunts what we call the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which is the part of the central nervous system and peripheral nervous system that causes cortisol and epinephrine to be made. And in the presence of feeling safety, you can attach and you can love someone. Now, what about fight or flight or mobilization? One of the things that I want to emphasize is that none of these states are good or bad. These are states that allow us to meet challenges that are in front of us and perhaps cope with experiences that have happened in our past that have led to reactions that might not be typical, but were protective when they happened. And the example that I often use for people is that it's the sympathetic nervous system that allows you to reach out and grab your 2-year-old when you see him or her getting ready to step off the curb into the street. So in the face of mobilization, fight or flight, the sympathetic nervous system is aroused. The pupils are dilated so that you can see a broader field of vision. We inhibit our excretory function, so you don't need to worry about your bladder or your bowels. And we mobilize our muscles. And we see sympathetic mobilization even in the youngest among us, babies, for example, in things like crying behaviors, protest behaviors, and even gaze aversion, looking away. Now, at the bottom of this, what we call autonomic ladder, we have life threat or immobilization. And it doesn't take somebody who knows anything about infancy or about even adult behavior to realize that this picture, which happens to be a picture from the American Dust Bowl, is one of despair and hopelessness. So when people feel like they are in a life-threatening situation, just like the reptile, they may immobilize. They become vegetative, passive, reflexive. They shut down. They try and blend in. Babies will lose muscle tone. They may feel despairing. They may feel apathetic. And in older children or adults, you can see actual fainting behaviors. You can see individuals who feign death. Or you can see individuals who actually dissociate, in other words, break from the reality of the situation as a way of coping with the life threat. And when you think about this in our environment, you think about situations, and sadly, there are many in our world right now, in which danger feels so overwhelming, you feel so helpless, that the best thing that you can do is simply to totally shut down and hope whoever the predator is leaves. So when our biological expectancies are met, in other words, the thing that is mammals that we have been bred to expect from other people, humans feel safe and they can socially engage. And when they can socially engage, they feel safe. And when they feel safe, they can socially connect with other people. And as they socially connect with other people, they feel safer. And over time, they can develop secure attachments. And it's important to keep in mind that we're not just talking about children here. Secure attachments are something that are absolutely necessary for us throughout life to optimize our health and well-being. And you can never have too many secure attachments, even in your adult life. So this brings us to thinking for a moment about the stress hierarchy. So stress is ubiquitous, and not all stress is bad. So, for example, for an infant or a young child, or even an adult, for example, who is engaging in a new task, there are brief increases in your heart rate, mild elevations in your stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine. And if you are scaffolded or buffered by the presence of people who care about you, whether you be an infant, a child, or an adult, it can actually be a positive experience. Think about the first time your kid, for example, may have jumped into a swimming pool, or the first time you ran a 5K. Yeah, there was stress involved, but it was positive stress if things went well. On the other hand, many people, and unfortunately, virtually all of the babies for whom I care, experience what we call tolerable stress. And those are serious temporary stress responses, but once again, in the face of supportive relationships. So if your kid skins his knee, but you're there, and he can run up to you, get a hug, and get a kiss on the boo-boo, it may have been a very frightening experience for him. But in the end, if he is supported well, it will be a tolerable stress. But at the far end of this spectrum is what we would call toxic stress. And toxic stress is what happens when there is prolonged activation of the stress response systems in the absence of protective relationships. So imagine, for example, a child who falls, experiences an injury, but there's never anyone there to pick him or her up. And if that happens time and time and time again, over time, that child learns that when things are bad, there will be nobody there to support him or her. And that has significant consequences for his social, emotional, and even his physical development. So, as we think about the topic for today, moving from what's wrong to what happens, what is our role as personal or professional caregivers? So, there is a family practice doctor who also is a psychiatrist by the name of Herbert Adler. And he talked about what it takes to develop a good professional relationship. And I would suggest that this isn't just about professional relationships, but about personal relationships and personal caregiving as well. And Dr. Adler talked about how developing provider relationships requires the person-to-person attunement that is essential for the development of the newborn. We may have more capacity to deal with stress as we get older, but we all need to feel like people in our world are attuned to us, recognize our needs, recognize our feelings, recognize our concerns, and can react appropriately to them. So if we think about how the proximity of an infant to a caregiver, so babies have to have adult caregivers around. Mammalian babies, they simply cannot survive without them. They must be taken care of because they have a prolonged period of dependency. So proximity of an infant to a caregiver is critical to survival and well-being. And proximity and availability of a caregiver to a patient, a client, or a family member instills a positive working model of relationships. And the working model of relationships has a very specific meaning in my field, and that is the sense that anybody has of their own value. Am I worth it? Am I valuable? Do I deserve to get what people are investing in me? So as we think about conveying safety and security, we think about maintaining physical and emotional proximity to people. So we can't just be there physically. We also have to be there emotionally as well. We can explicitly state our availability to people. We can try to engage the safety circuit that I talked about because it's iterative. The safer you feel, the better you connect. Then you feel safer, then you can attach and you feel safer. Maintaining eye contact in most situations. There are some situations and some individuals, for example, individuals on the autism spectrum may find that prolonged eye contact is simply too stimulating. Maintaining a soft facial expression, soft smile, warm touch if it is culturally appropriate and if it is tolerable by the person involved, and then what we call the prosody or the cadence or really the melody of our voices. It's the music of our voice and how we communicate. So I'm happy to take questions, hopefully thinking about moving from what's wrong with you to what happened to you and thinking about it from the context of your automatic or unconscious nervous system can help us support persons in recovery from brain injury and their family. And thank you for your attention. This is the book that Will was talking about. It's available at both Amazon and Norton. And I'm going to stop share right now so that I can actually see people and take questions. Oh, good. You took me off. Excellent. Good timing.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sanders. That was fascinating, and I really enjoyed the way that you broke down a lot of those concepts. Yeah, I would love to open this up first to see if I certainly have some questions. But I first want to open it up and see if any of our attendees had any questions about some of the material that we've been discussing.
If you have low testosterone, is that going to be an issue?
Low testosterone